It was the beginning of summer, and the weather was just starting to warm up in the small neighborhood where Daniel lived. He had been waiting for this time of year for months because it was the first summer he finally had his own swimming pool. After saving up for years and working long hours, he had decided to turn his plain backyard into a little piece of peace. It wasn't huge or fancy, but it was perfect for him. A small, quiet pool surrounded by a few chairs, some plants, and a fence that gave him privacy from the world. For Daniel, this pool meant more than just water and tiles. It was something he had dreamed about since moving into his house. He pictured himself sitting by the pool on weekends, sipping a cold drink, reading a book, or maybe inviting a few close friends for a barbecue. He loved quiet mornings, the sound of water rippling, and the simple joy of having something that was truly his. But as every homeowner learns, peace in a neighborhood never lasts long when someone nearby thinks the world belongs to them. That someone was his next-door neighbor. Karen. Karen had lived in the neighborhood long before Daniel moved in. Everyone knew her, not because she was friendly, but because she was the kind of person who always found something to complain about. If someone parked too close to her driveway, she complained. If kids played outside too loudly, she complained. And if someone's lawn looked better than hers, she complained about that too. Daniel had tried to stay polite with her. He greeted her with a smile the first few times they crossed paths. But even in those short moments, he could sense something off about her. She always had that tone, half nice, half judging, like she was keeping score of everyone's life in the neighborhood. At first, things were fine. Daniel spent the first few weeks of summer getting his backyard ready. He cleaned the pool, set up some chairs, and added a small grill in the corner. It looked beautiful. Every evening after work, he would take a quick swim to cool down. It was his favorite part of the day. Then one Friday, something strange happened. Daniel came home earlier than usual. He had finished his workday sooner and wanted to enjoy the sunny afternoon. But when he pulled into his driveway, he heard laughter coming from the backyard. Not his own laughter, other people's voices, splashing water, and the sound of clinking glasses. For a moment, he thought maybe someone had broken in. His heart raced. He carefully walked through his side gate, expecting to find something wrong. But what he saw left him speechless. There, in his pool, were Karen and two other women. They were lounging on inflatable floaties, wearing sunglasses, with music playing from a speaker. On his patio table sat an open bottle of lemonade and a half-empty snack bowl. They looked completely comfortable, as if they had been there for hours. Daniel froze for a second, not sure what to say. His own neighbor was using his private pool without even asking. It was so shocking that he almost laughed at first. But then anger started to rise in him. He finally spoke up. "Excuse me, what are you doing in my pool?" Karen turned her head slowly, completely calm. "Oh, hey, Daniel. You weren't home, so we decided to cool off. It's such a hot day." Daniel blinked. "That's my pool. You can't just walk in and use it." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so uptight. We're all neighbors here. It's not like we're hurting anything." Daniel couldn't believe the way she said it, like she was doing him a favor by being there. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Karen, this is private property. You can't use my pool without permission. Please get out," she sighed, rolling her eyes. "You know, the homeowners association said we can use each other's facilities if someone isn't home. That's what community living is about. Sharing." Daniel almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because of how ridiculous it sounded. "There's no such rule, Karen. It's my yard and my pool. You're trespassing." Her friends looked awkward now, slowly climbing out of the water. But Karen wasn't done. Fine, she said with a smirk. "We'll leave. But honestly, you're being kind of selfish, don't you think? Some of us don't have pools." Daniel didn't respond. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching as she grabbed her towel and walked out through the gate like she hadn't done anything wrong. When she was gone, he looked around at the mess they left behind. Wet footprints, empty cups, a floating towel, and chips scattered on the table. His stomach turned with frustration. He didn't understand how someone could be so entitled. It wasn't like he'd ever been rude to her. In fact, he had always tried to be respectful. But this was crossing a line. That evening, Daniel spent hours cleaning up the pool area. As he picked up the trash, he couldn't help but think about how easily people could take advantage of kindness. He had never imagined needing to lock his backyard, but maybe it was time to change that. The next morning, he decided to be direct but polite. He printed a small sign and placed it by the gate. Private property. No unauthorized entry. He thought that would be enough. Maybe Karen had just made a bad decision in the moment, and the message would make things clear. For a few days, everything seemed fine. Daniel enjoyed his usual evening swims again, the water calm and inviting. He started to relax, thinking the problem was over. But one afternoon, while he was out running errands, his phone buzzed. His security camera app sent him a motion alert from the backyard. He opened it quickly, and there she was again. Karen, this time with her teenage son, both sitting by the pool and dipping their feet into the water. Daniel couldn't believe it. It hadn't even been a week. She had seen the sign. She knew she wasn't allowed, but she came back anyway. He rushed home, frustration bubbling inside him. When he arrived, she was still there, chatting on the phone while her son tossed a beach ball around. Daniel walked up, trying hard to keep his voice calm. "Karen, we talked about this." She turned around, pretending to be surprised. "Oh, Daniel, you scared me. I was just letting my son cool off. He loves swimming, and your pool is so nice." "That's not the point," he said. "You can't just come into my yard whenever you want. This is private property." She put her phone down. "You really need to relax. You're making such a big deal out of nothing. It's just a pool." Daniel shook his head, completely stunned by her attitude. "It's not about the pool, it's about respect. You can't use something that doesn't belong to you." Karen gave him that same fake smile. "You know what? I'll talk to the HOA about this. I think neighbors should be more open. Sharing builds community spirit." He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You do that," he said, trying not to lose his temper. "But until then, stay out of my yard." She shrugged and left again, clearly annoyed that he wasn't backing down. Her son followed her, mumbling something under his breath. Daniel stood by the pool for a while, watching the water ripple under the sunlight. He didn't know whether to laugh or scream. It was his property, his hard work, and somehow he was being made to feel guilty for wanting privacy. That night, he told a few other neighbors about what happened. To his surprise, they weren't shocked. A couple of them shared similar stories, how Karen had borrowed things without asking or walked into their yards claiming it was no big deal. It seemed she had a habit of crossing boundaries. Daniel realized this wasn't going to stop on its own. He decided to keep his security cameras running at all times just in case. But deep down, he also knew he couldn't just keep confronting her every week. If she didn't respect words, maybe it was time to find a way to make her respect consequences. He didn't want revenge. He just wanted peace. But as he went to bed that night, the thought lingered in his mind. If she came back again, he wouldn't let it slide so easily. Over the next few days, Daniel tried to put the whole situation behind him. He wanted to believe that his neighbor had finally learned her lesson. After all, she had been caught twice already, and no normal person would risk the embarrassment a third time. He hoped she would move on and find someone else's business to bother, but something inside him kept buzzing with doubt. Maybe it was the way she had smirked as she left that last time. Maybe it was her tone, too confident, too careless. It was almost as if she believed she could do whatever she wanted and get away with it. That week, Daniel spent most evenings by the pool again. The weather was beautiful, and he didn't want one annoying neighbor to ruin what he had worked so hard for. He grilled some food, played soft music, and even invited his cousin over one weekend to enjoy the water. Everything seemed peaceful again, at least for a little while. Then one evening, just as the sun began to set, Daniel noticed something odd. As he was bringing in his garden tools, he saw Karen walking down the street with a couple of folding chairs and a large umbrella. She didn't see him at first, and he froze, watching her. Instead of heading toward her own house, she was going straight toward his backyard gate. He frowned, confused. Surely she wasn't doing it again, not right in front of him. He stepped forward and called out, "Karen, what are you doing?" She stopped, turned around, and looked slightly startled, though not guilty enough for someone caught trespassing. "Oh, hi, Daniel," she said, smiling like everything was normal. "I was just planning to enjoy the sunset by the pool. The light looks so pretty around this time." Daniel blinked. "By my pool?" She gave a little shrug. "Well, yes. It's such a nice spot. And I thought since you weren't using it right now, maybe I could just sit for a bit. I'm not even swimming this time." Daniel felt that familiar frustration building again. "Karen, we've talked about this. You can't come into my yard at all. You need permission." She sighed dramatically as if he were the one being unreasonable. "You're really serious about this, huh?" "I'm just trying to relax. It's not like I'm stealing anything. He kept his voice steady. It's not about stealing. It's about boundaries. You wouldn't want someone walking into your home without asking, right? Karen didn't answer that. She just stared at him for a second, then gave a little laugh. You really are uptight about this pool. Anyway, fine. I'll go sit somewhere else. She turned and walked away, muttering something under her breath. Daniel stood there for a moment, shaking his head. He couldn't believe how casually she treated other people's property. Most neighbors would have apologized and never done it again, but not Karen. She acted like the rules didn't apply to her. That night, Daniel sat on his porch, thinking. He realized that if he kept confronting her, it would just keep happening. She didn't take his words seriously because there were no real consequences. So he decided to start keeping track of everything properly. He checked his security camera footage again, saving every clip where she entered his yard. He took photos of the mess she left behind. He wanted to have proof just in case this turned into something bigger. The next day, he even called the local homeowners association to ask about any actual rules regarding property use. The woman on the phone was polite and firm. No one has the right to use another person's pool or yard without permission, she said. If your neighbor is doing that, you should report it, or you can call the police for trespassing if it continues. Daniel thanked her and hung up. He didn't want to cause a scene or make it a legal issue, he just wanted peace. But it was comforting to know the HOA didn't support her nonsense. For a few weeks, things finally seemed normal. Karen kept her distance. He saw her occasionally walking her dog or watering her plants, but she didn't even glance toward his fence. Daniel felt relieved. He started enjoying his weekends again, swimming in the mornings, reading by the pool in the evenings. It was exactly how he had imagined his summer. But of course, peace never lasted long with Karen around. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel had to leave town for the day to help his parents. It was hot, nearly 90 degrees, and the sky was bright and cloudless. Before leaving, he double-checked his gate, locked it, and even made sure his security cameras were working perfectly. He wasn't taking any chances this time. That night, when he returned home, the first thing he noticed was the faint smell of sunscreen and a couple of wet towels lying near the patio chairs. His stomach sank. He walked closer and saw tiny wet footprints near the pool steps. He turned toward the camera above the back door, his jaw tightening. He didn't even have to guess who it was. When he checked the footage, there she was again, Karen, coming through the gate in broad daylight. Somehow she had figured out how to unlatch it. She wasn't alone either. She had brought her 2 friends and their kids. They spent hours splashing, laughing, and drinking soda by his pool as if they owned the place. Daniel couldn't believe it. It was like a bad joke that kept repeating. He paced the living room thinking about what to do. He was angry, yes, but also tired. He didn't want a shouting match. He wanted her to understand she couldn't keep doing this. The next morning, he went to her house to talk. He knocked on the door, trying to keep his temper in check. Karen opened it, looking half asleep, holding a mug of coffee. "Morning," Daniel said calmly. "We need to talk about yesterday." She squinted at him. "What about yesterday?" "You were in my pool again." "I have it all on camera." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. It was so hot and the kids were bored." "You weren't even home." "What harm did it do?" Daniel clenched his jaw. "It's not your property. You don't get to decide when it's okay to use it." She put her hand on her hip. "You really need to relax. You're acting like I broke into your house or something. It's just water, Daniel. You can't be that possessive." "I'm not being possessive," he said. "I'm asking for basic respect." Karen shrugged, sipping her coffee. "Well, if it means that much to you, I'll try not to use it again. But honestly, I don't see the big deal." He stared at her, realizing nothing he said would make her understand. She didn't care about respect or boundaries. She only cared about convenience, hers. That conversation stuck in Daniel's mind for days. Every time he looked at his pool, he thought about how easily she had invaded his space, how little she cared about being caught. He started feeling uneasy whenever he left the house, always wondering if she'd sneak back in the moment he was gone. That's when he decided. Enough was enough. Words clearly meant nothing to her. Maybe it was time to send a stronger message, not by yelling or reporting her, but by teaching her a lesson she wouldn't forget. He didn't want to be mean, but he also didn't want to live in fear of being disrespected in his own home. He wanted to find a way to make her realize that actions had consequences, something she clearly hadn't learned yet. so he started thinking of ways to make that happen. At first, he considered putting up a taller fence or a lock with a code, but that would just be more work for him. He wanted something simple but clever, something that would make her never want to step near his pool again. He began taking notes, thinking through small, harmless ideas. Maybe he could add motion sprinklers near the gate so anyone walking through would get soaked unexpectedly. Or maybe he could set up a motion alarm that would start blaring if someone came near the pool. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that those ideas wouldn't be satisfying. They'd scare her off for a day or two, but she might come back. She didn't seem to feel embarrassment like most people did. He needed something she would remember. Later that week, while sitting at a cafe, Daniel overheard two men talking about how they were preparing their restaurant for a heat wave. One of them said they had ordered a truckload of ice to keep their drinks cold. That word, ice, stuck in his head. He smiled to himself, a small idea forming in the back of his mind. He didn't plan anything cruel or dangerous. He wasn't that kind of person. But maybe there was a harmless, funny way to turn the tables on Karen, to make her think twice before dipping into someone else's pool again. For now, though, he kept his plan quiet. He wanted to be sure. He wanted to prepare it properly, to make it perfectly safe yet impossible for her to ignore. Over the next few days, he watched her from a distance. Karen still walked around the neighborhood, greeting people like nothing had ever happened. Sometimes she'd glance toward his backyard, and he could see that familiar curiosity in her eyes. She clearly missed using his pool. Daniel smiled every time he noticed that look, because if she ever decided to sneak in again, she was in for a surprise, one that would make her think twice before calling someone too uptight ever again. The idea of using ice kept floating in Daniel's mind for days. It started as a small thought, something that made him chuckle to himself, but the more he imagined it, the more it seemed like the perfect plan. It was harmless, funny, and clever enough to make a point without crossing any lines. Most importantly, it would be a lesson Karen would never forget. Every time he walked past his pool, he pictured the look on her face when she'd dip her toes into freezing cold water, expecting it to be warm and pleasant. The thought alone made him smile. It wasn't revenge in a cruel sense, it was justice with a touch of humor. But before doing anything, Daniel wanted to make sure it was safe. He didn't want anyone getting hurt or the pool equipment getting damaged, so he started researching how much ice it would take to make the water very cold but not dangerous. He read articles, watched a few videos, and even called a local ice supplier pretending he was throwing a cool-themed summer party. The man on the phone told him they could deliver several 100 pounds of ice if needed. Daniel took notes. He figured if he filled the pool early in the morning, the water would stay icy cold for most of the day, especially since it was deep enough to hold the chill for hours. It would look totally normal from the outside, clear and inviting, but the moment someone jumped in, they'd get a shock they'd never forget. For the next few days, he quietly prepared. He didn't tell anyone about his plan, not even his cousin, who would have definitely laughed about it. He wanted this to be his private little victory. He also made sure the gate was slightly easier to open. He didn't want Karen to think it was locked and change her mind. He wanted her to walk straight in, just like she always did. On Friday afternoon, Daniel got the call from the ice supplier confirming delivery for early Saturday morning. He smiled as he hung up. Everything was set. That night, he double-checked his security cameras again, adjusting one to face the pool more directly. He wanted a clear view, not because he planned to embarrass anyone, but because he knew she'd never believe she was in the wrong unless she saw herself caught in the act again. When morning came, Daniel woke up early. The sky was a soft pink and the air already warm. He could hear birds chirping as he stepped outside. A few minutes later, the rumble of a small delivery truck broke the morning quiet. The driver got out, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Got a big order of ice for a party?" the man asked, grinning. Daniel smiled back. "Something like that." They spent the next half hour unloading bag after bag of ice, clear, shining cubes that sparkled under the morning sun. He helped dump them into the pool, watching as steam rose from the sudden temperature change. The surface rippled gently, and a cool mist hung in the air. By the time they were done, the pool looked the same as always, still, blue, and inviting. But Daniel could already feel the chill in the air when he leaned close. He tested the water with his hand. It was freezing. He couldn't help but laugh quietly to himself. He paid the delivery man, thanked him, and went back inside to wait. The plan was simple. He'd act like he was out for the day, just like before. Karen always seemed to know when he wasn't home. Maybe she watched from her window or kept track of his car leaving. Either way, he wanted her to think she had another free afternoon to borrow his pool. Around 11 o'clock, Daniel grabbed his keys and drove off. He didn't go far, just a few blocks away to a small cafe where he could still check his security camera feed on his phone. He ordered coffee, sat by the window, and waited. For almost an hour, nothing happened. Then, just as he was thinking maybe she wouldn't show up this time, his phone buzzed. The motion alert from his camera popped up. He tapped it quickly, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and disbelief. There she was, Karen, walking right through his side gate, sunglasses on, holding a drink in one hand and her phone in the other. Behind her were two women, probably her friends, carrying towels and snacks. They looked so casual, so confident, like they were walking into a hotel pool they had booked. Daniel couldn't stop smiling. It was actually happening. He turned up the brightness on his phone screen and leaned in, watching as they set their things on the patio chairs. One of the women dipped her foot into the water, then quickly pulled it back, her face twisting in confusion. Karen laughed at first, thinking her friend was joking, but then she dipped her own foot in, and the reaction was instant. She jumped back, letting out a loud gasp that Daniel could practically hear through the screen. Her face went from confident to shocked in seconds. She tried again, lowering her foot slowly as if maybe she'd imagined it, but the moment she touched the water, she yanked it out again, muttering something to her friends. They all started, talking at once, looking around the pool like it had betrayed them. One of them picked up a handful of ice cubes still floating on the surface, holding them up. Daniel nearly spilled his coffee from laughing quietly in his seat. On the screen, he watched as Karen's mood shifted from surprise to frustration. She stomped her foot, grabbed her towel, and started pointing toward the house, clearly angry but not brave enough to actually knock on his door. Her friends looked embarrassed. Within minutes, they gathered their things and left. Daniel watched them leave, shaking his head with a satisfied grin. The plan had worked perfectly. A little while later, he drove home, pretending like nothing had happened. The pool looked calm again, the ice mostly melted. He could still see a few cubes drifting lazily near the steps. He stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, enjoying the peace. For the first time all summer, it felt like the space truly belonged to him again. That evening, he sat on the porch with a cold drink, smiling every time he thought about their faces. He knew Karen would probably try to come up with some excuse or complaint, but deep down, he didn't care anymore. He hadn't done anything wrong. The water was safe and no one got hurt. He had just made his point in a way she'd understand. Sure enough, the next morning, he saw her outside watering her plants. She avoided looking directly at him at first. Then, after a few moments, she called out, pretending to sound casual. "Hey, Daniel." He turned toward her. "Morning." She hesitated before speaking again. "Your pool water was, kind of cold yesterday. You might want to check your filter or something." Daniel bit back a laugh. "Thanks for the tip, but I already checked. It's working fine." She squinted at him, realizing he knew exactly what she was talking about. "Right," she said finally. "Well, just saying, it's, colder than usual." He nodded politely. "Yeah, I like to keep it that way sometimes. Keeps the water fresh." Karen blinked, unsure what to say next. "Fresh, right." She quickly turned and went back to her yard, clearly embarrassed. After that day, Daniel noticed a change. Karen didn't come near his pool anymore. She stopped glancing toward his backyard. In fact, she avoided eye contact altogether for a while. Her loud music and small gatherings became less frequent. It seemed she had finally learned her lesson, or at least realized Daniel wasn't someone to push around. A few weeks later, Daniel was having a small barbecue with a couple of friends. They were sitting by the pool, laughing and talking when one of his friends said, "You've got such a nice setup here. Bet your neighbors are jealous." Daniel smiled. "Yeah, One of them was a little too interested for a while, but I think she's moved on. They all laughed, and for the first time in months, Daniel felt completely at peace in his own home. The pool sparkled under the evening light, quiet and calm, exactly how he liked it. He didn't tell anyone the full story. It was his secret victory, a reminder that sometimes the best way to deal with rude people wasn't through anger or arguments, but with a clever idea that spoke louder than words. Still, every time he walked past the freezer section at the grocery store and saw bags of ice stacked up, he couldn't help but grin. It always reminded him of that summer day when his patience finally paid off, and when one very entitled neighbor finally got a cold dose of reality. The next few days after the icy surprise were some of the most peaceful Daniel had enjoyed since he'd built his pool. The air felt lighter, the backyard quieter, and even the neighborhood seemed calmer. He hadn't realized how much mental space that constant tension with his neighbor had taken up until it was finally gone. He started to settle into his normal summer routine again. Early swims in the morning, a little grilling on the weekends, sometimes inviting friends over to relax. Every time he looked at the clear blue water, he smiled, remembering how that one harmless plan had changed everything. He had finally gotten his peace back. For nearly 2 weeks, there was no sign of Karen bothering him. She didn't look his way, didn't make small talk, didn't try to find another excuse to step foot in his yard. She went about her days quietly, watering her plants, walking her dog, and waving politely to other neighbors. For a while, Daniel thought maybe things were finally normal, but peace in that neighborhood never seemed to last forever. One warm afternoon, Daniel was sitting by the pool reading when he heard the sound of someone walking along the side fence. He looked up and saw Karen standing on the other side, holding a pair of sunglasses and pretending to look at something in her garden. She glanced over and caught his eye. "Hi there," she said quickly, as if trying to sound casual. "Hey," Daniel replied. She gave a small, awkward laugh. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Yeah," he said. "Perfect weather." There was a short silence between them. She tapped the fence lightly with her fingers. "So, she began. "I just wanted to say, I think we got off on the wrong foot earlier this summer." Daniel set down his book, waiting. "I might have crossed a line a few times," she continued, her voice a bit forced but still polite. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I just thought, since we're neighbors and it's such a nice pool, maybe it was okay to share once in a while. I guess I misunderstood." Daniel appreciated that she was at least acknowledging it, even if she wasn't fully apologizing. "I get it," he said calmly. "It's easy to assume things sometimes. But yeah, it's my private space. I just like to keep it quiet and personal." She nodded quickly. "Right, of course, totally understand." Then, almost like she couldn't help herself, she added, "The kids still talk about your pool, though. They said it was the coldest water they've ever felt. What did you do to it that day?" "It was like an ice bath." Daniel smiled slightly, trying to hide his amusement. "Oh, must have been the weather," he said casually. "We had a cool breeze that week." Karen raised an eyebrow but didn't push further. "Well," she said after a moment, "I'm glad we cleared that up." "No hard feelings?" "None at all," he said. She smiled, waved, and walked away. When she disappeared into her house, Daniel leaned back in his chair and laughed quietly. It wasn't a real apology, but it was close enough. He could live with that. He hoped she really meant what she said this time. The following weekend, Daniel decided to host a small barbecue for a few close neighbors. He wanted to do something friendly and lighthearted, partly to enjoy his summer and partly to show there were no grudges. When he invited people, most of them happily agreed to come. Even Karen got an invite, mostly because Daniel wanted to give her a chance to be part of the community in a better way. On Saturday afternoon, everyone gathered in his backyard. The grill was going. Music played softly in the background and laughter filled the air. People brought salads, drinks, and desserts. It felt like the kind of summer afternoon Daniel had imagined when he first built the pool. Karen showed up a little late, carrying a plate of cookies. "Thought I'd bring something sweet," she said, smiling. "Thanks," Daniel said. "Glad you came." She looked around the backyard. It looks so nice. You really did a great job here. I appreciate that, he said genuinely. Throughout the afternoon, things went surprisingly well. Karen chatted with a few neighbors, helped serve food, and even complimented Daniel on how well he maintained the pool. It almost felt like the tension between them had melted away for good. But as the day went on and people relaxed, Daniel noticed Karen watching the pool more than usual. She didn't go near it, but her eyes kept drifting toward the water. When a few kids asked if they could swim, he said yes. He always let kids use it if their parents were around. Karen smiled watching them play, but there was something in her expression, a mix of longing and curiosity. Later that evening, when most people had gone home, Karen lingered for a few extra minutes. It was really nice, Daniel, she said. You should do this more often. Thanks, he said. Glad everyone enjoyed it. She hesitated, then said softly, You know, I actually used to swim a lot. It's relaxing, helps me clear my mind. Maybe that's why I liked your pool so much. It reminded me of when I was younger. Daniel nodded. I get that. Swimming does that for me too. There was a small silence. She gave him a polite smile and left. That night, Daniel sat outside long after everyone was gone. The water reflected the soft glow of the porch lights, and the air was filled with the faint smell of grilled food and fresh grass. He thought about how far things had come, from the arguments and trespassing to an almost friendly barbecue. Maybe this really was the turning point. Maybe she'd changed. For the next week, everything stayed quiet again. No unexpected visitors, no strange noises, no trespassing. Daniel felt like his plan had not only worked, but maybe even fixed their neighborly relationship. But then one Friday evening, something unexpected happened. Daniel was inside watching a movie when his phone buzzed with a camera alert. He frowned, not immediately worried. Sometimes it was just a cat walking by or a branch moving. But when he opened the app, his stomach sank. It was Karen. Again. She wasn't swimming this time, but she was standing right by the pool, holding a small flashlight and looking into the water. It was late, almost 9 at night. Daniel watched through the camera feed as she leaned over and touched the water with her hand. Then she looked around quickly as if to make sure no one was watching and walked out. He couldn't tell what she was doing or why she was there, but it unsettled him. The next morning he went to check the backyard. Everything seemed normal. No mess, no missing items, no signs of damage. But something about it didn't sit right. Why come so late alone just to look into the pool? He decided not to confront her right away. Maybe she was just being curious, maybe it was nothing. But he still adjusted the camera angle again, making sure it caught the whole area clearly. For a few more days, nothing happened. Then one afternoon, he heard laughter coming from outside while he was working in his home office. He looked out the window and saw Karen talking to 2 other neighbors near the street. They were laughing about something, and one of them pointed toward Daniel's house. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but it was obvious his name had come up. He sighed. He didn't like drama, and he especially didn't like being the center of gossip. Still, he decided to let it go. He had already proven his point once. He didn't need to start another conflict. A week later, though, Karen surprised him again, but this time in a good way. She came by one afternoon holding an envelope. Hey, Daniel, she said with a polite smile. I wanted to thank you for inviting everyone to that barbecue. It was really nice. So I made something for you. He opened the envelope and found a small handwritten note. Inside, she'd written a simple message. Sorry for all the trouble earlier this summer. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I understand your point now. Thanks for being patient with me. Daniel smiled as he read it. That's really kind of you, he said. I appreciate it, she nodded. We're neighbors, right? Might as well keep things friendly. Agreed, he said. For the first time, her smile looked genuine, not forced or defensive, just honest. After she left, Daniel sat on the porch for a while, thinking about everything that had happened since the start of the summer. It was strange how things had unfolded. What started as a frustrating problem had turned into an unexpected lesson about patience, boundaries, and even forgiveness. From that point on, their relationship was simple and respectful. She stayed on her side, he stayed on his, and they exchanged friendly waves now and then. There were no more surprises, no more sneaking around, no more arguments, and though Daniel never said it out loud, he knew that one afternoon with the frozen pool had changed everything, not just because it had made his neighbor think twice, but because it reminded him that sometimes humor and calmness were stronger than anger. As summer slowly faded into cooler weather, Daniel looked out at his pool one last time before covering it for the season. The water was still and clear, the sky golden from the setting sun. He smiled, feeling a deep sense of relief. It had been one strange summer, one that had tested his patience, made him laugh, and taught him that standing up for yourself doesn't always have to mean starting a fight. Sometimes all it takes is one clever idea and a few bags of ice. The summer slowly turned into fall, and the long, warm days started to fade. The trees around the neighborhood began changing colors. The sound of sprinklers became less frequent, and the smell of barbecue smoke was replaced with the scent of fresh-cut wood and coffee. For Daniel, the past few months had been a strange journey, one that began with frustration but ended with understanding. He didn't expect things to turn out the way they did. When he built his pool earlier that year, he just wanted a quiet place to relax, to swim in peace after long days of work. He never imagined it would turn into a story about neighbor drama, frozen water, and unexpected lessons about patience. One late afternoon, Daniel sat on his porch with a cup of tea in his hand. The air was cooler now, and a soft breeze carried the sound of leaves rustling down the street. His backyard was quiet except for the gentle ripple of the pool water. He hadn't covered it yet, even though the season was nearly over. He liked the way it looked in the evening light, the way the fading sun turned the surface gold for a few minutes before it disappeared. He thought about how much had changed since that first argument. Karen hadn't stepped foot near his property since she'd given him that handwritten note weeks ago. She'd kept her word, staying on her side, greeting him politely when they crossed paths, and even helping out at the next neighborhood cleanup day. It was almost strange to see her acting so friendly, considering how tense things had been before. But Daniel appreciated it. People could change when they wanted to, he realized. Sometimes all they needed was a little push, or in this case, a very cold pool. Later that evening, Daniel heard a knock on his front door. When he opened it, he was surprised to find Karen standing there again, holding a small box. She smiled nervously. "Hey," she said. "I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all," Daniel replied. "What's up?" She handed him the box. "I was cleaning my garage earlier and found these. They're extra chlorine tablets. I figured you might be able to use them before winter hits." Daniel smiled. "That's thoughtful of you, thanks." She nodded and looked around awkwardly for a second. "You know," she said, "I've been meaning to tell you something. I really was embarrassed that day with the ice. I know everyone heard about it and I looked ridiculous. But honestly, it kind of woke me up. I didn't realize how much I'd been pushing people's boundaries until then." Daniel leaned against the door frame, listening quietly. "I think," she went on, "I just got used to doing whatever I wanted around here. I thought it was harmless, but it wasn't fair to you or anyone else. So, I'm sorry again," he nodded. "Apology accepted, really, we all make mistakes." She smiled softly, looking relieved. "Thanks for saying that. Anyway, I'll let you get back to your evening." "Good night, Karen," he said as she walked away. After she left, Daniel set the box on his kitchen counter and chuckled to himself. Life had a funny way of teaching lessons. Sometimes it didn't take shouting or arguing to make a point. It just took a bit of creativity and patience. Over the next few weeks, the weather continued to cool down. Daniel spent more time indoors reading or cooking, while occasionally stepping out to check on the pool. He started to think about covering it for the winter, but part of him liked leaving it open just a little longer. It reminded him of summer, the long days, the sound of splashing water, the laughter of his friends during the barbecue. One weekend morning, he decided to invite a few friends over for one last small gathering before officially closing the pool. Nothing fancy, just coffee, pastries, and good conversation. They sat outside wrapped in light jackets, watching leaves fall from the trees. As they talked, one of his friends joked, "So, Daniel, any more trouble from your ice pool incident?" Daniel laughed. "Nope. I think that story finally melted away." Everyone laughed, and someone added, "That's still one of the funniest things I've ever heard. You really showed some creativity there." Daniel shrugged with a grin. It wasn't about getting even. It was about making a point without making things worse. It worked out better than I expected. Later that afternoon, after everyone left, Daniel sat alone by the pool again. The water was still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. He watched a single leaf drift across the surface and thought about how much he'd learned in a few short months. He thought about patience, how easy it was to lose it when someone disrespected your space, and how hard it was to hold on to it long enough to find a clever solution. He thought about kindness too, how even people who frustrated you could still surprise you in the end. Sometimes, he realized, people act out of ignorance, not malice. They just don't think about how their actions affect others until they're forced to see the consequences. Maybe that's what had happened with Karen. She wasn't a bad person, just someone who needed a reminder that respect works both ways. That evening, Daniel took one last swim of the year. The water was cool but not cold, and the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. He floated on his back, watching the clouds drift by, feeling calm and grateful. When he finally got out, he wrapped himself in a towel and sat for a while, letting the evening breeze dry his hair. The sound of crickets began to fill the air, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Everything felt peaceful again, the way it had before the summer began. He realized that, in a strange way, he was actually thankful for what had happened. It had been stressful at times, sure, but it had also brought out the best in him. He had stayed calm when it would have been easy to get angry. He had found humor in a frustrating situation, and he had managed to set boundaries without turning into someone he didn't want to be. A few days later, the HOA sent out a community newsletter, a small, cheerful one they did every season. To his surprise, there was a short section written by Karen. It was titled Respecting Shared Spaces. In it, she wrote a few simple lines. Living close to others means learning where our space ends and theirs begins. Sometimes we forget that what seems harmless to us can feel like an intrusion to someone else. A good neighborhood is built on kindness, honesty, and respect. Let's remember that as we move into a new season. Daniel smiled when he read it. He didn't need to ask who inspired that piece, he already knew. When he saw her a few days later, he gave her a friendly nod. "Nice article," he said. She grinned. "I thought you might catch that." And just like that, they both laughed. No tension, no awkwardness, just two neighbors who had learned something and moved on. As winter finally settled in, Daniel covered the pool and put away the deck chairs. He looked around his quiet backyard one last time, feeling satisfied. The ice incident had become more than just a funny story. It had become a reminder that small acts of cleverness and calm could fix even the most annoying problems. He knew people in the neighborhood would still talk about that day from time to time. It had become something of a local legend, the day Karen learned a very chilly lesson. But Daniel didn't mind. Every time he thought about it, he smiled. Not because of revenge, but because it showed that you could handle problems with humor instead of hostility. Months later, when spring rolled around again, Daniel uncovered the pool and cleaned it up for the new season. The water sparkled under the sun, just like it had the first time he filled it. As he stood there with the net in his hand, Karen waved from across her yard. "Getting ready for summer again?" she called out. "Sure am," he replied. She smiled. "Don't worry, I won't be crashing any pool parties this time." Daniel laughed. Glad to hear it. It felt good to have everything back to normal, not just the pool, but the peace that came with it. Sometimes the best stories weren't about big dramatic moments or perfect endings. They were about small changes, quiet lessons, and the little ways people learned to get along. That summer turned out to be one of the best ones yet. Daniel hosted more barbecues, spent time with friends, and enjoyed the sunshine without worry. Every time he looked at the pool, he felt a mix of pride and amusement. He had handled things his own way, and it had worked. And whenever someone new moved into the neighborhood and heard whispers about the ice pool story, Daniel just smiled and said, "Let's just say it was the coolest solution I ever came up with." He never needed to explain more than that, because sometimes the lesson spoke for itself.